The untamed Arizona territory bred remarkable souls during the tumultuous years following the Silver Rush of '76. Legendary gunslingers like six-shot Silas Harding, the infamous Caldwell Gang, and the merciless Jacob Deadeye Dawson etched their legacies into the desert landscape with gunpowder and blood. But perhaps none left a more astonishing heritage than Catherine Quicksilver Blackwood, a woman whose very name would later cause the most hardened outlaws to holster their weapons and change direction. A seemingly ordinary widow with eyes of steel grey that could track a falcon's flight across vast canyons, and whose custom Colt spoke only in the precise language of life and death. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As she once calmly told her daughter, people mistake quietness for weakness until that quiet person shows them why silence was always a choice, not a limitation. Join me as we explore the remarkable tale of the woman they called Quicksilver, the widow of Whispering Creek, who demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous gunslinger is the one nobody sees coming until it's too late. Whispering Creek, Arizona, a territory. Spring of 1886, Whispering Creek was like many settlements scattered across the southwestern frontier, a dusty collection of weathered buildings surrounded by towering mesas where ambition and survival intertwined beneath the vast desert sky. The kind of remote outpost where folks valued self-reliance above all else, which is precisely why Catherine Blackwood chose it. She arrived on a clear April morning, guiding a wagon loaded with modest possessions. Her young daughter, Elizabeth, perched beside her. Her faded blue calico dress caught the desert breeze as she navigated the rutted path into town. Those who witnessed her arrival would later recall two distinct impressions: the lacquered wooden case she kept within arm's reach at all times, and her unusual steel-grey eyes that seemed to register every detail without appearing to look directly at anything. The townsfolk of Whispering Creek were accustomed to families seeking fresh beginnings in the territory, but something about Catherine Blackwood and her watchful daughter triggered subtle ripples of curiosity. She carried herself with an unassuming confidence that some mistook for the caution of a woman alone in the world, an assumption that would one day prove dangerously misguided. Sheriff Jeremiah Dawson, who had maintained order in the growing settlement for nearly 8 years, observed the newcomers from the steps of his modest office. "There's two types who seek out places this remote," he later wrote in his journal. "Those escaping something terrible, and those searching for something worth finding. Mrs. Blackwood struck me as possibly being both." Mrs. Abigail Montgomery, who ran the town's only boarding house, was the first to establish a genuine connection with the mysterious widow, providing temporary lodging while Catherine sought more permanent arrangements. Abigail couldn't help but notice certain peculiarities about her guest. The woman maintained a rigid schedule, always positioning herself, with clear sightlines to doors and windows. More telling was how her daughter, though only 10 years old, displayed an unusual vigilance, checking perimeters and speaking in curiously measured tones for a child her age. But what truly caught Abigail's attention were Catherine's hands as she unpacked her belongings. Though she dressed and spoke like a genteel woman of modest means, her hands told a different story, calloused and strong, with small, nearly invisible scars across the knuckles and a distinctive hardening of the trigger finger that Abigail recognized. From her late husband's hand, these weren't the hands of a sheltered housewife, but of someone intimately familiar with firearms and their regular use. Abigail was a woman who understood the value of discretion on the frontier. The questions she chose not to ask spoke volumes about the respect Catherine quickly earned in the small community. Within 2 weeks of their arrival, Catherine had purchased the old Prescott Place, a sturdy cabin with a small clearing nestled against the foothills 3 miles outside town. The previous owner, a prospector who'd lost his nerve after a cave-in 2 seasons prior, had been eager to sell and return east. She paid in gold double eagles, each coin gleaming like her unusual eyes, as she counted them out carefully for Mr. Thompson, the town's notary. "There's something about this valley," she told Harrison Cooper, the local mercantile owner, as she purchased supplies for repairs and preparations. "Something that feels right for Elizabeth and me." Her assessment wasn't wrong, though she couldn't have foreseen how fiercely she would one day defend this home she was creating. The widow settled into her new property with methodical efficiency that raised few eyebrows but privately impressed her scattered neighbors. She reinforced the cabin walls, established a small garden of hardy vegetables, and built a chicken coop with precise carpentry skills that suggested experience beyond ordinary homemaking. She paid for goods promptly, attended the occasional community gathering, though she rarely participated actively, and politely declined most social invitations. When addressed, she responded with soft-spoken courtesy and a smile that was genuine, but somehow guarded, as if portions of herself remained carefully locked away. This reserved demeanor earned her the affectionate local nickname, the Quiet Widow Blackwood. Young Elizabeth, with her mother's steel-grey eyes and solemn demeanor, soon found her place at the settlement's small schoolhouse. The girl was uncommonly observant and displayed an unusual knowledge of mathematics and distances that fascinated her teacher, Miss Eleanor Foster. "Your daughter has remarkable natural abilities, Mrs. Blackwood," Miss Foster commented during a parent meeting. "She seems to calculate distances and trajectories with unusual precision. Her mathematical mind is quite extraordinary for someone so young." "Her father was the same way," Catherine replied simply, offering no further explanation. Harrison Cooper, whose mercantile served as the settlement's unofficial gathering place and information exchange, began noticing peculiar patterns. In the widow's purchases, she acquired gunsmithing tools in small, seemingly innocuous quantities, explaining them as necessary for maintaining the rifle she kept for protection. Her eyes lingered on wanted posters and territorial notices, though she never remarked upon them. Most curiously, she had an instinctive habit of positioning herself in corners of the store, maintaining clear sightlines to both the entrance and the back door. Cooper had spent enough years on the frontier to recognize the habits of someone accustomed to watching for trouble. As the summer heat settled over Whispering Creek, no one suspected that the quiet widow with the unusual eyes was anything more than she appeared. No one knew that her strong, capable hands had once earned her the reputation as the most deadly exhibition shooter in 3 states, or that her keen vision had once saved an entire stagecoach company from an Apache ambush in terrain so treacherous. It had been deemed impassable, but that was about to change. The Hollister gang was moving southeast toward Whispering Creek after a bloody bank robbery in Tucson, and with them came a storm that would strip away the careful disguise Catherine Quicksilver Blackwood had constructed for herself and her daughter. The air grew heavy with tension as whispers of the Hollister gang's approach reached Whispering Creek through stagecoach drivers and telegraph messages. Stories of their particular brand of cruelty preceded them. Not just robberies and killings, but deliberate acts of terror designed to prevent resistance in the next town they targeted. Sheriff Dawson had weathered his share of trouble in his years wearing the badge, but the approaching threat of Samuel Hollister and his brothers, men infamous for their particular hatred of lawmen, had etched new lines of worry across his weathered face. In his mercantile, Harrison Cooper watched. Catherine Blackwood examined the latest territorial notices with that same quiet intensity she brought to everything. Her eyes lingered on one in particular, a detailed description of the Hollister gang's recent activities, including the execution of a sheriff and his deputy in a small settlement not unlike their own. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. "Terrible business," Cooper commented, trying to draw his customer into conversation. "Word is, the Hollisters are heading this way. 3 brothers and their gang, maybe a dozen men in all. Sheriff Dawson's called a town meeting for tomorrow evening. Some men mistake isolation for vulnerability," the widow said softly, carefully folding the remainder of her purchased fabric. "They forget that those who survive in remote places do so because they've learned to be resourceful." That same afternoon, Abigail Montgomery made an unexpected visit to the Blackwood cabin, finding Catherine repairing a fence with practiced efficiency. Elizabeth sat nearby, whittling what appeared to be a wooden animal with remarkable skill. For a child her age. "Town council's meeting tomorrow night," Abigail said without preamble, "to discuss preparations for the possibility of the Hollisters coming through our valley. Dawson's looking for volunteers to form a defensive committee." Catherine continued her work, her movements precise and economical. "Good people with good intentions," she replied, setting another fence post with perfect alignment. "But inexperience can be as dangerous as the threat itself." "Then what would you suggest?" Abigail asked, studying her friend's controlled movements. For just a moment, something flickered in those steel-grey eyes, something cold and calculating that seemed starkly at odds with her widow's persona. "Preparation, information, advantage," Catherine answered quietly, driving a nail with perfect precision. Then the moment passed, and she was once again just a widow preparing her homestead. Abigail wasn't the only visitor that day. As evening approached, Sheriff Dawson himself rode out to the Blackwood place. He found Catherine on the porch, mending what appeared to be one of Elizabeth's dresses, while her daughter practiced her reading by lantern light. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, remaining mounted as courtesy dictated when calling on a lone woman with a child. "Thought I should personally inform you about the town meeting tomorrow. We might have trouble coming our way." "Kind of you, Sheriff," she replied, her hands never pausing in their work. "But frontier life has taught me that trouble rarely announces itself properly. It tends to arrive whether we're prepared or not." Something about her words, about the way her hands moved so steadily across the fabric, triggered a memory in Dawson's mind. 5 years ago, during his time as a deputy in New Mexico Territory, he'd heard stories about a female exhibition shooter who had toured with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, a woman with uncanny accuracy who could hit targets most men couldn't, even see clearly. They reportedly called her Quicksilver for the speed of her draw and the gleaming look in her eyes when she concentrated. She had vanished from public appearances shortly after a violent altercation with a group of drunken spectators who had murdered her husband, a former army captain who managed the shooting exhibition. As the sun began to set over Whispering Creek, painting the mesas in shades of crimson and gold, more rumors arrived by telegraph. The Hollisters had raided a stagecoach station 40 miles northwest, leaving few survivors. They were traveling southeast, marking their path with characteristic violence. In town, preparations began in earnest as households gathered extra supplies and men checked their weapons. But out at the Blackwood cabin, Catherine calmly helped. Elizabeth with her reading lessons before tucking her into bed with a story. "Mom," the girl asked, her grey eyes so like her mother's, serious in the lamplight, "are bad men coming?" Catherine smoothed her dark hair back from her forehead, her touch gentle, though her eyes remained alert. "There are men coming who do bad things," she corrected carefully, "but they won't harm you or anyone in this valley if I can help it." "Because of what you taught me? About watching and listening?" A rare, genuine smile softened Catherine's features. "That's right. Remember what I've told you about the hawk? It sees everything from above," Elizabeth recited, "but nothing sees it until it's ready to strike. Exactly. She kissed her daughter's forehead. Now sleep. Tomorrow we have preparations to make. After Elizabeth drifted off, Catherine moved silently through the cabin. She knelt before the large wooden trunk at the foot of her bed and carefully removed a false bottom that concealed a hidden compartment. From this cavity, she withdrew an oilskin-wrapped package. When unfolded on the table, it revealed a custom Colt revolver with pearl grips and intricate silver inlay, a matching ammunition belt of unusual design, and a small, leather-bound book, filled with newspaper clippings and handwritten notes in a precise, educated hand. For nearly an hour, she studied these materials by lamplight, occasionally making new notations. Her face in these private moments bore little resemblance to the reserved widow the townspeople knew. Here, alone with her true self, Catherine Quicksilver Blackwood displayed the focused intensity of a predator, calculating the precise moment to strike. Dawn broke over Whispering Creek with a crystalline clarity that only desert air can provide. Catherine had been awake for hours, moving through a series of preparations that would have seemed peculiar to anyone who might have observed them. She dressed Elizabeth with particular care, including an extra layer beneath her usual clothes, and sturdy boots that would withstand rough terrain. Into her pockets went a small compass, a carefully folded piece of paper with precise instructions written in her neat hand, and a silver whistle on a chain around her neck. "Remember our special places," she told her quietly over breakfast. "If anything happens in town today, you go to the first one and wait. Count slowly to 500. If I haven't come by then, proceed to the second place." Elizabeth nodded solemnly, displaying none of the confusion or fear one might expect from a child receiving such instructions. Instead, her young face showed the serious concentration of someone performing an important, well-rehearsed duty. "And if you have to go all the way to the third place," Catherine prompted, "open the box there and follow the map inside," she recited perfectly. "Don't stop for anyone except Miss Abigail or Sheriff Dawson, and only if they know the special words." "Good girl," she touched her cheek gently. "Today, we'll go to town for supplies. I need you to be my second set of eyes. Watch everyone, especially strangers." As they drove their small wagon toward town, Catherine maintained a casual demeanor, but her gaze continuously swept the landscape with practiced precision. She noted fresh tracks on the trail that suggested at least 3 riders had passed this way before dawn, unusual for the remote path they traveled. In town, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Groups of men gathered outside the sheriff's office, while women moved purposefully between households, organizing supplies and safe locations for children. The town meeting the previous night had clearly galvanized the community into action. Catherine guided their wagon to Cooper's Mercantile, her movements unhurried despite the underlying urgency she clearly felt. As Elizabeth helped unload empty preserving jars they were returning, she noticed a stranger lounging against the hitching post 2 buildings down, a man whose casual pose was belied by the alertness in his eyes as he surveyed the street. A scout, an advance man checking the town's defenses and routines. Harrison Cooper greeted them with strained cheerfulness as they entered his store. "Mrs. Blackwood, Elizabeth, good morning to you both. Quite a commotion today, isn't there?" "Indeed," Catherine replied mildly, handing him her supply list. "I thought it prudent to stock up given the circumstances." As Cooper gathered her items, Sheriff Dawson entered the Mercantile, his expression grim but controlled. He nodded to Catherine. "Mrs. Blackwood, Elizabeth, good to see you both in town. I'd recommend finishing your business quickly and returning home. We've had reports the Hollisters may be closer than we initially thought." "Thank you for the warning, Sheriff," Catherine responded, maintaining her role as a concerned but composed widow. "We'll be on our way shortly." It was then that Elizabeth, standing near the store's front window, tugged gently at her mother's skirt, a signal they had clearly established between them. Catherine casually moved to straighten her collar, using the motion to glance out the window. 3 riders had entered the far end of the street. Their posture, their weapons, and their calculated spacing as they rode marked them clearly as men, accustomed to violence. One man peeled off to speak with the stranger Catherine had noticed earlier. "Sheriff," she said quietly, her voice suddenly carrying a different quality, more authoritative, more precise. "Those men aren't just passing through." Dawson's hand instinctively moved toward his gun as he stepped to the window, careful to stay partially concealed by the frame. "Hollister scouts," he confirmed grimly, "likely checking our defenses before the main group arrives." Catherine's steel-grey eyes narrowed slightly as she studied the men's movements. "No," she corrected with quiet certainty. "Those are the Hollister brothers themselves. Samuel, William, and the youngest, Matthew. They've left their gang behind to reconnoiter personally." Dawson turned to her, surprise evident on his face. "How could you possibly know that?" Instead of answering, Catherine knelt before Elizabeth, her hands steady on her shoulders. "Remember your instructions. The time to follow them is now." The girl nodded once, her young face serious but unafraid. Catherine looked up at the sheriff, and in that moment, Dawson saw something change in her eyes. A transformation so profound, it was as if a different person suddenly occupied her skin. "Sheriff." "Dawson," she said, her voice now carrying unmistakable command, "I need you to create a distraction in approximately 3 minutes, something that will draw their attention to the livery stable, away from the path my daughter will take out the back of this building." Before Dawson could respond, she turned to Cooper. "Harrison, I need your shotgun, 30 shells, and whatever coil of rope you have in stock. Add it to my account." Both men stared at her, momentarily stunned by the shift in her demeanor. "Now, gentlemen," she added quietly, "lives depend on how quickly you move in the next few minutes." It was her tone, the absolute certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed in crisis situations, that spurred them into action. Cooper wordlessly retrieved the requested items, while Dawson, still confused but responding to the authority, in her voice, moved toward the door. "Who are you really?" he asked, pausing at the threshold. "Catherine Quicksilver." Blackwood straightened to her full height, the careful disguise of widowed gentility falling away like an unneeded cloak. "Someone who knows exactly what Samuel Hollister is capable of," she said, her steel-grey eyes cold as a desert night in winter, "and exactly how to stop him." As Catherine Blackwood checked her Winchester and secured additional ammunition in her dress pockets, the carefully constructed life she had built in Whispering Creek over the past 10 months flashed through her mind. The quiet routine she had established had served its purpose well, providing Elizabeth with stability while keeping them both safely anonymous. But now, as she prepared to face a threat she had long anticipated, Catherine knew that peace was about to shatter like a bottle on a shooting range. "Take Elizabeth through the back," she instructed Cooper, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to giving orders in life-or-death situations. "There's a storage cellar beneath the apothecary. Get her to Miss Abigail. Then find Deputy Collins and tell him to circle around behind the saloon." Sheriff Dawson studied her with narrowed eyes, pieces of a puzzle finally connecting in his mind. "You're her, aren't you? Quicksilver Kate from the Buffalo Bill show. Thought you'd disappeared after that business in St. Louis." "Catherine will do just fine, Sheriff," she replied, checking the shotgun's action with practiced hands. "And yes, I disappeared for good reason. Now, unless you want 3 of the most vicious killers in the territory to add Whispering Creek to their list of conquests, I suggest you follow my lead." Dawson nodded, recognizing the calm expertise of someone who had faced violence before. "What's your plan?" "First, We get my daughter to safety. Then we ensure Hollister doesn't leave this town with enough men to threaten another settlement." Her words carried a cold finality that made even the hardened lawman pause. As Cooper ushered Elizabeth toward the back door, Catherine knelt quickly before her daughter. "Remember everything I taught you," she said softly. "I'll find you at the special place." Elizabeth's steel-grey eyes, so like her own, showed understanding beyond her years. "I'll be careful, Mom. You too." The simple exchange carried the weight of countless drills and preparations. With one last touch to her cheek, she sent her daughter with Cooper while turning her attention back to the immediate threat. "Those men out there aren't just common bandits," Catherine explained, moving to a position where she could observe the street without being seen. Samuel Hollister was a Confederate sharpshooter during the war. His brothers learned from him. They planned their attacks with military precision, studying their targets for weaknesses before they strike. "How do you know so much about them?" Dawson asked, checking his ammunition. "Because 4 years ago they attended one of my shooting exhibitions. In Denver," she replied, her expression hardening. "Samuel challenged me to a contest. When I outshot him in front of 200 spectators, he took it, personally. Swore he'd find me someday and prove who was the better shot." Before she could continue, a commotion erupted from the direction of the saloon, Dawson's deputy creating the distraction they needed. As the Hollister brothers turned their attention toward the noise, Catherine slipped out a side window, moving with silent efficiency toward the rear of the buildings. Her movements were nothing like those of the modest widow the town had come to know. Each step was calculated, precise, her body held in the practiced posture of someone who had spent thousands of hours with a gun in hand. This was Quicksilver Kate, the woman whose shooting exhibitions had once drawn crowds from St. Louis to San Francisco, now emerging from a disguise she had worn for nearly a year. 8 months earlier, Catherine and Elizabeth Blackwood had arrived in Whispering Creek with little more than a wagon of possessions and the hope of anonymity. Their journey had begun 3 years before, following a tragedy that had forced them into hiding. Captain James Blackwood had been a respected Army officer before leaving service to manage his wife's increasingly popular shooting exhibitions. Their partnership had been both personal and professional. He handled the business while she performed feats of marksmanship that left audiences gasping in disbelief. Until the night in St. Louis, when 3 drunken men, furious at losing bets on a challenger who claimed he could outshoot the woman, cornered James behind the exhibition tent. Catherine had heard the confrontation from inside, but by the time she reached her husband, the damage was done. A knife between the ribs, a final whispered warning, and the beginning of her life as a widow. The official investigation had yielded nothing. The perpetrators, all connected to wealthy St. Louis families, claimed self-defense and were cleared of charges. But Catherine knew the truth, had seen one man's distinctive snake tattoo as they fled, and recognized the deliberate technique of the killing. What had begun as her personal quest for justice became a desperate flight to protect her daughter when she discovered the men had connections to the notorious Hollister gang. Whispers reached her that Samuel Hollister himself had ordered the attack, revenge for his public humiliation, dressed up as a random act of violence. For 3 years, they had moved from settlement to settlement, staying ahead of both revenge and rumor. Whispering Creek, remote and self-sufficient, had seemed the perfect place to finally establish a home while she planned her next move. Now, as Catherine circled behind the mercantile, she caught sight of Matthew Hollister, the youngest brother, separating from the others to investigate the storage sheds behind the saloon. The moment she had both anticipated and dreaded for years had arrived with unexpected suddenness, forcing her to become again the woman she had tried to leave behind. Sheriff Dawson had emerged from the mercantile, creating a convincing confrontation that held the attention of Samuel and William Hollister in the main street. His performance bought Catherine the precious seconds she needed to close the distance to Matthew, approaching from his blind side. "Don't move," she whispered, the barrel of her revolver pressing against the base of his skull. "Hands where I can see them, Matthew." The young outlaw froze, his body tensing at the unmistakable pressure of a gun barrel and the shock of hearing his name from a stranger. "Who the hell are—" he began, but fell silent as Catherine moved slightly, allowing him to glimpse her face. "Remember me now?" she asked, her voice carrying none of the gentle tones Whispering Creek had come to associate with the widow. "Denver 4 years ago. Your brother made quite the spectacle of himself." Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by fear. "You're that shooter, the one they called Quicksilver." "I'm also the widow of James Blackwood," she added coldly. "The man your associates murdered in St. Louis on your brother's orders." Matthew's expression confirmed what she had suspected for years. This hadn't been a random attack by drunken spectators. It had been deliberate, calculated revenge for Samuel's public humiliation. "That wasn't me," he stammered. "I wasn't even there. That was all Sam's doing. And yet here you are, riding with him, preying on towns like this one." Catherine's voice remained steady as she secured his weapons with her free hand. "How many innocent people have died because of your family's reputation, Matthew? How many children left fatherless?" The young Hollister had no answer, his earlier bravado evaporating under her cold gaze. With practiced efficiency, Catherine bound his hands and secured him to a support post inside the empty storage shed. A bandana served as an effective gag, preventing him from warning his brothers. "Your brothers will join you shortly," she informed him quietly. "Consider yourself fortunate. You get to watch what happens when men like Samuel finally face someone they can't intimidate." Outside, the confrontation between Sheriff Dawson and the Hollister brothers was intensifying. Samuel, a tall man with a distinctive scar running from temple to jawline, kept his hand hovering near his holstered revolver as he responded to the lawman's questions with barely concealed contempt. "We're just passing through, Sheriff," he drawled, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. "No need to get yourself killed over a simple misunderstanding." William, standing slightly to his brother's left, maintained a watchful position, his eyes constantly scanning rooftops and windows for potential threats. Of the 3 brothers, he was reputedly the most dangerous in close quarters, quick with a knife and utterly without conscience. Neither man had yet noticed their younger brother's absence, their attention fixed on the confrontation with Dawson. The sheriff, to his credit, maintained a convincing performance, showing no sign that he was deliberately holding the outlaw's attention. "Funny thing about that," Dawson replied, keeping his distance. "Most folks passing through don't send scouts ahead or case the town like they're planning to rob it blind." Samuel's scarred face twisted into a smile that never reached his eyes. "Careful, lawman. Men who make accusations like that tend to have short careers." As they spoke, Catherine moved silently along the back of the buildings, positioning herself precisely where she had calculated she would have the clearest advantage. The years of exhibition shooting had taught her to analyze angles and distances instinctively, to know exactly where a bullet would travel before she ever pulled a trigger. From her vantage point between the apothecary and the gunsmith's shop, she could see both Hollister brothers clearly while remaining unseen herself. More importantly, she could see the 3 additional riders who had just entered the far end of the street, the advance scouts for the main gang, arriving exactly as she had predicted. The citizens of Whispering Creek had vanished from the street's doors and shutters closing as word spread of the confrontation. Only Dawson remained exposed, standing alone against what now appeared to be 5 armed outlaws. This was the moment Catherine had both dreaded and prepared for since identifying the Hollister gang's movement pattern in the territorial notices. She had secretly reinforced her cabin's walls, established hidden caches of ammunition throughout her property, and taught Elizabeth emergency procedures that no child should have to learn. The widow, who had seemed so reserved at community gatherings, had, in private, maintained the shooting regimen that had once made her famous, practicing at dawn in a secluded canyon where the sound wouldn't carry, keeping her skills honed to a lethal edge. Now, as she watched Samuel Hollister's hand drift closer to his gun while taunting the sheriff, Catherine made the decision she had avoided for 3 years. It was time to become Quicksilver Kate once more, not for vengeance, but to protect the community that had given her and Elizabeth a chance at a normal life. Her first shot wasn't aimed at either brother, but at the ground between them. A precise placement that sent dust and stone fragments spraying upward, startling both men and causing them to draw their weapons reflexively. "That's far enough, Samuel," she called, her voice carrying across the street with commanding clarity as she stepped partially into view, her custom Colt aimed with unwavering steadiness. "Tell your men to drop their weapons, or the next shot puts you in the ground." The scarred outlaw froze, recognition and disbelief warring on his face as he identified the voice from his past. Slowly he turned toward her, his expression transforming into something between hatred and grudging admiration. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, making no move to lower his weapon. "The legendary Quicksilver Kate, hiding out in this dusty little nowhere. We've been hunting you a long time, Mrs. Blackwood." "Not hunting well enough, apparently," she replied coolly, maintaining her aim. "I've been watching you stumble around the territory for months. Your tracking skills have gotten sloppy." Samuel, William Hollister, less controlled than his brother, made a subtle movement toward his second revolver. Catherine's response was immediate. A shot that removed the hat from his head without grazing skin, a feat of marksmanship few would believe possible if they hadn't witnessed it. "The next one takes your ear, William," she stated calmly. "I suggest you reconsider." The street had fallen into a tense standoff. Catherine, with her revolver trained on Samuel, Sheriff Dawson covering William, and the 3 newcomers at the far end of the street, hesitating as they assessed the unexpected situation. "Where's Matthew?" Samuel demanded, his eyes narrowing as he finally noticed his younger brother's absence. "Secured," Catherine answered simply. "Along with the 2 scouts you sent ahead yesterday. Did you really think a town that survived Apache raids and claim jumpers wouldn't notice strangers watching our routines?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Samuel Hollister's scarred features. The carefully planned raid on what should have been an unprepared settlement had somehow transformed into a confrontation with a woman whose shooting abilities were legendary. A woman with personal reasons to see him dead. "You've got me at a disadvantage, Kate," he acknowledged, his use of her exhibition name deliberate. "But you're forgetting something important. And what might that be?" she asked, her aim never wavering. His smile returned, cold and confident. "The rest of my men are less than an hour behind us. 20 experienced gunmen against whatever collection of shopkeepers and farmers you've managed to arm. Even you can't shoot that many before they overwhelm this town." Catherine's expression remained impassive, but inwardly she calculated rapidly. If Samuel was telling the truth, and she suspected he was, Whispering Creek faced a threat far greater than she had anticipated. The Hollister gang at full strength would indeed overwhelm the town's defenses, regardless of her own abilities. "Then it seems we have a decision to make," she replied, her mind racing through possibilities. "You can order your men to ride on past this town when they arrive, or you can watch your brothers die before the first shot is fired against Whispering Creek." The transformation of the quiet widow into this cold-eyed gunfighter had caught even Sheriff Dawson by surprise. The woman who had politely declined invitations to social gatherings now stood unflinching in a life-or-death confrontation with some of the territory's most dangerous outlaws. "You're bluffing," Samuel scoffed, though doubt had crept into his voice. "You're an exhibition shooter, not a killer." Catherine's steel-grey eyes hardened further. "You forfeited the right to that assumption when you sent men to murder my husband, Samuel. I've changed since Denver." Before Samuel could respond, the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked echoed from the roof of the Mercantile. Deputy Collins had positioned himself as Catherine had instructed, providing another angle of fire on the Hollister brothers. Simultaneously, Harass and Cooper emerged from the gunsmith shop with a loaded shotgun, and two more townsmen appeared at windows overlooking the street, rifles at the ready. The odds had shifted dramatically, and Samuel Hollister knew it. What should have been a simple reconnaissance had turned into a potential last stand for the leadership of his gang. The cold calculation in his eyes showed he understood exactly how precarious his position had become. "Seems we both have decisions to make," he said finally, his voice carrying the dangerous edge of a cornered predator. "Question is, Quicksilver Kate, are you ready to make the play that ends this standoff one way or another?" Catherine's aim remained steady, her resolve absolute. The moment of confrontation she had both dreaded and prepared for had arrived, forcing her to become again the woman she had tried to leave behind. Not just an exhibition shooter, but a protector willing to do whatever necessary to defend what was hers. "I was born ready, Samuel," she replied, her voice carrying across the tense silence of Whispering Creek's main street. "The real question is whether you're prepared to die today." The tense standoff in Whispering Creek's dusty main street seemed frozen in time. Catherine, with her Colt trained unwavering on Samuel Hollister, the scarred outlaw leader calculating his odds with cold precision. Sheriff Dawson kept William covered, while Deputy Collins maintained his position on the Mercantile roof, rifle aimed steady. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across the scene, the silence broken only by the distant call of a desert hawk circling. "Overhead, 20 men, Samuel," Catherine finally spoke, her voice carrying clearly in the stillness. "Interesting. Last I heard in Tucson, you were down to 15 after that failed bank job. You always did have a talent for exaggeration." A flicker of surprise crossed the outlaw's face. She had been tracking his movements more closely than he'd realized. "Whereas your talent," he countered with forced casualness, "was making widows. Except, it seems, of yourself." Catherine's expression remained impassive despite the barb. "Last chance. Order your advance scouts to drop their weapons, then we discuss terms." Samuel's laugh held no humor. "Terms? You're still thinking like a performer, Kate. This isn't an exhibition with rules and a paying audience. This is survival." I couldn't agree more. Without shifting her aim from Samuel, she called out, "Cooper, signal Abigail." From the gunsmith's shop, Harrison Cooper raised a small mirror, flashing sunlight 3 times toward the church steeple. Almost immediately the church bell began to toll, not the panicked clanging of an alarm, but a deliberate, measured sequence. Samuel's eyes narrowed. "What game are you playing?" "No game, just preparation." Catherine's steel-grey eyes remained fixed on him. "That signal is mobilizing every able-bodied resident of Whispering Creek according to the defense plan we established months ago. Your advance scouts at the edge of town are about to have company." As if to confirm her words, rifle shots rang out from the direction of the 3 riders who had just entered town. 2 immediately dove for cover, while the 3rd clutched his leg, his horse rearing in panic. "You see, Samuel," Catherine continued calmly, "I've had 10 months to prepare this town for trouble. We've drilled repeatedly for various scenarios, including the arrival of a gang exactly like yours." For the first time, genuine uncertainty showed on the outlaw leader's scarred face. The simple raid he had envisioned was unraveling before it even began. "Perhaps you're wondering how I knew you were coming specifically." Catherine pressed her advantage. Those two drifters who passed through 3 days ago, the ones asking casual questions about the town's defenses and my whereabouts? They weren't as anonymous as you hoped. One had a distinctive snake tattoo on his wrist, rather like the man who killed James. Samuel's expression hardened, but she continued before he could respond. We gave them exactly the information I wanted you to have. That I was a defenseless widow, that the sheriff was elderly and ineffective, that the town had no organized defense. A cold smile touched her lips. You walked into a trap of your own making, Samuel. Pride always was your weakness. The transformation of quiet Catherine Blackwood into the deadly Quicksilver Kate was now complete, her tactical mind fully engaged in the confrontation she had anticipated for years. Behind the mercantile, Elizabeth Blackwood crouched in the root cellar beneath the apothecary, listening to the distant sounds of confrontation. Miss Abigail sat beside her, a loaded shotgun across her lap, not the frightened shopkeeper most townsfolk believed her to be, but a woman who had survived 3 Apache raids in her younger days. Your mother has everything under control, Abigail reassured the girl, noting her alert but composed demeanor. Quite the remarkable woman, isn't she? Elizabeth nodded solemnly. Mum says preparation beats desperation every time. Smart woman, Abigail agreed, impressed by the child's composure. Not many would recognize the Hollister gang from descriptions alone, much less develop a defense plan against them. She didn't recognize them from descriptions, Elizabeth corrected. Matter-of-factly. She's been tracking them for years. She has a book with all their known associates' movements and hideouts. Every night she updates it. This revelation added new layers to Abigail's understanding of the quiet widow who had settled in their midst. The methodical record-keeping explained how Catherine had known exactly when and how the Hollisters would approach Whispering Creek. Outside in the street, the strategic situation continued to evolve. The 3 advanced scouts at the edge of town were now pinned down by rifle fire from several buildings, effectively cutting them off from supporting their leaders. Samuel and William remained caught in the standoff, their options diminishing by the minute. 13 men by my count, Catherine continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than an armed confrontation. Assuming your main force is indeed where I believe they are, camped at Cottonwood Spring about 7 miles southeast of here. The flash of confirmation in Samuel's eyes told her she had guessed correctly. Too far to hear gunfire from town, she noted. They'll be expecting your signal to advance, which means we have time to resolve this situation before they become impatient. William Hollister, less controlled than his brother, finally broke his silence. You think you've got it all figured, don't you? What happens when our boys ride in and find us held at gunpoint? They'll burn this town to the ground. They might. Try, Sheriff Dawson interjected calmly, but they'd have to get past the dynamite charges we've placed along the only approach route wide enough for a group that size. This was a bluff. There were no explosives, but the conviction in Dawson's voice made it convincing. Catherine had coached him well on psychological warfare during their hurried planning session. You're lying, Samuel challenged, though. Doubt had crept into his voice. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Am I? The same way I was lying about capturing Matthew, or about knowing your movements, or about having this town prepared? She let the questions hang in the air before continuing. You've lost the advantage of surprise, Samuel. Now you're just 3 men separated from your force, facing an entire town that's ready for you. What exactly do you want? He finally asked. The first sign that his confidence was truly shaken. First, I want your guns. All of them. Catherine's voice remained steady. Then I want information about the men who killed my husband in St. Louis. And if I refuse, then I put a bullet through your gun hand, just like I promised in Denver. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a threat, but a simple statement of fact. You'll never shoot straight again. William gets the same treatment from the sheriff, and you both watch whatever remains of your gang ride into a prepared ambush without leadership." As they spoke, Cooper had been gradually moving to a more advantageous position, his shotgun trained on the Outlaws. The pattern of forces had shifted subtly, but definitively, creating a triangle of firepower that left the Hollister brothers with no safe direction to move. Samuel Hollister had built his reputation on cunning and viciousness rather than suicidal bravery. Catherine could see him calculating odds, weighing options, searching for any advantage in a situation that had deteriorated beyond his control. "Times have changed since the war, Samuel," she pressed, recognizing his hesitation. "The territories are becoming civilized. Telegraph lines connect every major settlement. Pazis can be mobilized within hours. The days when outlaws could terrorize towns with impunity are ending." The scarred outlaw leader's eyes narrowed. Curious lecture from a woman who spent years hiding from her past rather than facing it. "I wasn't hiding," Catherine corrected him. "I was hunting. Every town we passed through, every rumor we tracked, every wanted poster I studied, all of it led to this moment, facing you on my terms, not yours." The revelation struck home. Samuel Hollister suddenly understood that he hadn't been pursuing Quicksilver Kate at all. She had been methodically maneuvering him into a confrontation of her choosing. "Enough talk," Sheriff Dawson interrupted. "Your decision, Hollister. Surrender now or we end this the hard way." For several heartbeats no one moved. Then, with deliberate slowness, Samuel Hollister raised his hands slightly. "Seems you've outmaneuvered." "Me, Kate," he acknowledged, a dangerous edge still present in his voice. "But this doesn't end here, no matter what happens next." "Drop your weapons," she instructed, giving no indication she had heard his implied threat. "Both of you. Gun belts, too." William began to comply, slowly unbuckling his gun belt, but Samuel remained motionless, his hands still hovering near waist. "Level. I said drop them, Samuel." Catherine's aim never wavered. "You know," he replied, his voice suddenly conversational, "there's something I've wondered since Denver. All those fancy exhibition shots, shooting dimes out of the air, splitting playing cards edge on. But could you really pull the trigger when it counted? When it wasn't just show business?" Catherine's expression remained impassive. "You're stalling." A thin smile crossed his scarred face. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just curious if the legendary Quicksilver Kate can actually—" His hand dropped to his holster with the lightning speed that had made him notorious throughout the territory. Most men would have been caught flat-footed by the sudden move after such a tense standoff. Catherine Blackwood was not most men. Her Colt barked once, the report echoing between the buildings. Samuel's draw faltered as the bullet found its mark, precisely where she had promised, through his right hand, shattering bone and rendering his fingers useless. His unfired revolver clattered to the dirt as he clutched his bleeding hand, cursing through clenched teeth. William froze, his own weapon half drawn, as he found himself staring into the unwavering barrel of Catherine's Colt, which had shifted to cover him before his brother's gun hit the ground. "That answers your question," she said quietly, no satisfaction or remorse in her voice, just the calm certainty of someone who had done exactly what she intended. "Now, finish removing that gun belt before you join your brother in needing a doctor." The demonstration of her speed and accuracy left no room for further resistance. William Hollister slowly removed his weapons, kicking them toward Sheriff Dawson as instructed. "Cooper," Catherine called, never taking her eyes off the outlaws. "Fetch Dr. Miller for Samuel's hand, then help the sheriff secure these two with their brother in the jailhouse." As the mercantile owner moved to comply, Samuel Hollister glared at Catherine through eyes glazed with pain. "This isn't justice," he spat. "This is personal vengeance." "You're right about one thing," she acknowledged coldly. "It is personal. But the justice comes next, when you stand trial for murders across 3 territories, including that of James Blackwood." Once the Hollister brothers were disarmed and secured, Catherine turned her attention to the 3 advanced scouts still, pinned down at the edge of town. With Sheriff Dawson coordinating, the townspeople maintained their covering fire while Deputy Collins approached the trapped men with terms: surrender immediately or face the same fate as their leaders. Seeing the Hollister brothers being led away in shackles, the scouts quickly abandoned any thought of resistance. Within minutes, all 5 outlaws were secured in Whispering Creek's small jailhouse, their weapons confiscated, and their wounded receiving reluctant treatment from Dr. Miller. Only then did Catherine Blackwood allow herself to exhale fully, the intensity of combat focus gradually receding as she assessed the situation. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but a larger danger remained. The main body of the Hollister gang, still waiting at Cottonwood Spring for a signal that would never come. "They'll get restless by nightfall," she explained to Dawson as they conferred outside the sheriff's office. "When Samuel doesn't return or send word, someone will ride in to investigate." The sheriff nodded, already thinking ahead. "We need to prepare for that possibility. How many men did you actually count in their main force?" "Based on the tracks I've been monitoring, no more than 12, Catherine replied, "possibly fewer after their losses in Tucson." "Still too many for a direct confrontation," Dawson mused, "especially with most of my defensive positions revealed now." Catherine's tactical mind was already formulating alternatives. "We don't need to confront them directly. We need to convince them their leaders have ridden on without them." "And how do we manage that?" A cold smile touched her lips. "By using Samuel Hollister's own methods against his men." Before she could elaborate, Elizabeth came running down the street from the apothecary, Miss Abigail following at a more dignified pace. Catherine knelt to embrace her daughter, the brief display of emotion a stark contrast to the deadly efficiency she had demonstrated minutes earlier. "You did exactly as we practiced," she said softly, checking Elizabeth for any sign of distress. "I'm proud of you," the girl nodded solemnly. "I knew you'd stop them. You always said people who use fear as a weapon don't know what to do when someone stands up to them." Catherine smiled at hearing her own lessons repeated back to her. "That's right. And now we need to make sure the rest of their gang understands that lesson too." As townsfolk cautiously emerged from buildings and hiding places, Catherine found herself the center of curious attention. The quiet widow, who had kept to herself for nearly a year, had suddenly transformed into a legendary markswoman who had outdrawn and outshot one of the territory's most feared outlaws. Harrison Cooper approached, shotgun still in hand, but his expression reflecting newfound respect bordering on awe. "Mrs. Blackwood, or should I say Quicksilver Kate, that was the most remarkable shooting I've ever witnessed." Catherine acknowledged the comment with a slight nod. "Thank you for your help. Mr. Cooper, your timing with that signal was perfect." "Seems we've all had parts to play," he replied thoughtfully, "though some more surprising than others." His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer. "You know, there are some who might wonder why a woman of your talents chose our humble Whispering Creek to settle in. Perhaps for the same reason many others have," she answered, her voice softening slightly. "To find a place where Elizabeth and I could belong." Before Cooper could respond, Sheriff Dawson joined them, his weathered face serious. "We need to move quickly if we're going to deal with the rest of Hollister's gang. What exactly did you have in mind?" Catherine's expression shifted back to tactical focus. "We use their own fear and uncertainty against them. Samuel rules through intimidation. His men follow him because they're more afraid of him than anything else." "How does that help us?" Dawson asked. "Because fear is a weapon that cuts both ways," she explained. "By sundown, I want word spreading among his men that Samuel Hollister, the unbeatable gunslinger, the former Confederate sharpshooter, was outdrawn by a woman in front of the entire town, then surrendered rather than face her again." Cooper grinned in understanding. destroy his reputation, you destroy his power over them. Exactly. But we need more than just rumors. Catherine turned to Dawson. I need 5 minutes alone with Samuel. The sheriff hesitated. He's dangerous even, wounded. So am I, she replied simply. In the jailhouse, Samuel Hollister sat on a rough wooden bench, his wounded hand crudely bandaged. His brothers occupied the 2 adjacent cells, William pacing like a caged animal, while Matthew sat quietly, having accepted their fate. When Catherine entered alone, Samuel looked up with undisguised hatred. Come to gloat? No. She remained standing just beyond his reach. I came to offer you a choice. I'm not interested in anything you're offering. He spat. Catherine continued as if he hadn't spoken. Your men will be wondering where you are soon. When they come looking, they'll either find you in custody, defeated by the woman you've hunted for years. A humiliation that will destroy whatever reputation you have left. Or they'll learn. You've moved on, leaving instructions that they should scatter and regroup at your secondary hideout near the border. The outlaw's eyes narrowed suspiciously. What secondary hideout? The one you're going to tell them about in the letter you're going to write. Catherine's voice remained matter-of-fact. A location far enough away that the law will have time to prepare a proper reception committee. Samuel gave a harsh laugh. And why would I help you trap my own men? Because the alternative is watching your legend die, she answered coldly. By tomorrow, every settlement within 100 miles will know how Quicksilver Kate outdrew the notorious Samuel Hollister in the middle of Whispering Creek. How you begged for mercy. How your brothers watched you weep. That's a lie, he snarled. Of course it is, she agreed calmly. But lies travel just as fast as truth in these territories. Faster sometimes, especially when people want to believe them. For the first time, genuine fear flickered in Samuel Hollister's eyes. Not physical fear, but the terror of a man whose entire identity rested on his fearsome reputation. In the cutthroat world of outlaw gangs, respect was currency, and Catherine was threatening to bankrupt him completely. The choice is yours, she continued. Help disperse your gang with your reputation partially intact, or become a cautionary. A tale told in every saloon from here to Tucson. Samuel Hollister stared at her for a long moment, truly seeing her for the first time. Not as the exhibition shooter he had humiliated years ago, but as a strategist who had outmaneuvered him. At every turn, "You've changed, Kate," he said finally, his voice quieter. "The woman I met in Denver wouldn't have been capable of this." Catherine Blackwood met his gaze unflinchingly, the steel in her eyes matched only by the certainty in her voice. "That woman died in St. Louis with her husband. I'm what remains." Twilight descended over Whispering Creek, painting the desert landscape in purple shadows as Catherine Blackwood stood on the jailhouse porch, watching the horizon. In the streets, townsfolk moved with purpose, implementing the defensive strategy. She had devised over hours of intense planning with Sheriff Dawson and the town's most capable residents. The confrontation with the Hollister brothers had transformed the quiet settlement into an organized militia, united by the shared determination to protect their home. Inside the jailhouse, Samuel Hollister sat at the sheriff's desk, his wounded hand freshly bandaged by Dr. Miller. Under Catherine's unwavering gaze and Dawson's shotgun, he painfully scrawled a letter to his waiting gang. The message was carefully crafted, Catherine dictating specific wording that would convince his men to disperse without arousing suspicion. "Sign it," she instructed when he finished, sliding the paper toward him. Samuel's eyes, cold with hatred, met hers as he scratched his signature. "You realize this only delays the inevitable. There are others who'll come looking when word spreads that you've resurfaced." "Perhaps," Catherine acknowledged, taking the letter. "But those are problems for another day. Tonight we deal with your men." Deputy Collins entered, his young face serious. Riders approaching from the east, Mrs. Blackwood. 2 men moving cautious. Catherine nodded. Right on schedule. The main gang getting impatient, sending scouts to check on their missing leaders. She examined the letter once more before folding it carefully. Time to set our plan in motion. She turned to Dawson. Keep him secured. If anything goes wrong, get Elizabeth from Abigail and take her to the 3rd special place. She knows what to do from there. The sheriff nodded grimly. Nothing's going wrong. This town doesn't abandon its own. Something flickered in Catherine's steel-grey eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at being so quickly accepted as one of Whispering Creek's own, despite her hidden past. The sentiment settled around her shoulders like an unexpected but welcome blanket. Outside, Catherine briefed the volunteers who would implement her strategy. Harrison Cooper would play the role of a drunken prospector, intercepting the scouts with Samuel's letter and a convincing story about being paid to deliver it. Miss Abigail's nephew Thomas, an excellent rider, stood ready to follow the scouts. At a distance, to confirm they returned to the main gang with the message. Remember, Catherine instructed Cooper, you're just a hapless drunk who stumbled on easy money. No details beyond what we've rehearsed. Cooper nodded, already transforming his usually dignified demeanor into that of a whiskey-soaked fortune seeker. Don't worry, I've played this role before. Spent 3 years prospecting before opening the mercantile. As they took their positions, Catherine found herself with a rare moment of solitude. The confrontation with Samuel had torn away her carefully constructed disguise, exposing Quicksilver Kate to the community she had hoped would never know that part of her. Now she stood revealed, not just as a legendary markswoman, but as a woman who had methodically planned for violence while pretending to seek peace. You're not the only one with secrets, came a voice behind her. Abigail Montgomery approached, her practical skirt swishing in the desert dust. Most who come to places like Whispering Creek carry pasts they'd rather leave behind. Catherine studied the older woman thoughtfully. And yours? A sad smile touched Abigail's weathered face. Boston socialite, married a man who took me west chasing silver dreams. When Apaches killed him, I discovered I was better at survival than grieving. She glanced toward the jailhouse. We all have our ghosts, Catherine. Difference is, yours caught up with you. Before Catherine could respond, a shout came from the eastern edge of town. Cooper had made contact with the scouts. Both women tensed, watching the distant interaction. The entire plan hinged on this moment. If the ruse failed, Whispering Creek would face the full wrath of the Hollister gang. Minutes stretched like hours until Cooper staggered back into town, his performance as a drunken messenger convincingly maintained until he was out of sight of the riders. They took it, he reported, straightening and dropping the act. Read the letter right there, asked a few questions about who gave it to me. I said it was some fancy dress fella with a scar who paid me in silver to deliver it to his men waiting. East of town? And they believed you, Catherine pressed. Hook, line, and sinker, Cooper confirmed with satisfaction. Even gave me an extra $1 for my trouble. Thomas is trailing them back to the main group now. Relief washed through Catherine, though she allowed none of it to show on her face. Phase 1 had succeeded, but the night was far from over. 2 hours later, Thomas returned with confirmation. The Hollister gang had broken camp at Cottonwood Spring and was riding south, following the instructions in Samuel's letter to regroup at a non-existent hideout near the Mexican border. In the jailhouse, Catherine delivered the news to their prisoners. Your men won't be coming, Samuel. By morning, they'll be scattered across 3 counties, riding hard for a rendezvous that doesn't exist. Matthew Hollister, the youngest brother, looked up in genuine confusion. Where are they actually going? Right into the waiting arms of the Arizona Rangers, Sheriff Dawson answered with satisfaction. Sent a telegraph to Captain Reynolds this afternoon. He's had a standing order to round up what remains of your gang for months. William lunged against the cell bars, cursing viciously. You lying witch! You said you'd let them go if Sam cooperated. Said I'd have them disperse, Catherine corrected calmly. I never specified where to or what might be waiting when they arrived. Samuel, unlike his enraged brother, remained coldly composed. Clever, but this changes nothing between us, Kate. This is just the first hand in a much longer game. Catherine studied the outlaw leader, seeing not just the scarred face that had haunted her nightmares, but the desperate calculation behind his eyes. There is no longer game, Samuel. By this time tomorrow, you'll be on your way to Yuma Prison, to await trial for multiple murders. Whatever remains of your reputation will fade into campfire stories and cautionary tales. For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Samuel Hollister's features. Not physical fear, but the existential terror of a man facing his own erasure from history. Outside, Whispering Creek gradually returned to an uneasy calm. Defensive positions were maintained through the night, but as dawn approached with no sign of further threat, the town began to exhale collectively. By mid-morning, a telegram arrived confirming that Rangers had intercepted and captured 8 members of the Hollister gang near Apache Pass. Catherine found Elizabeth in Abigail's kitchen, calmly helping prepare biscuits, as if the previous day's events had been nothing extraordinary. The sight of her daughter's remarkable composure brought a complex mixture of pride and sadness. Pride in Elizabeth's resilience, sadness that circumstances had required her to develop such strength at such a young age. Is it over? Elizabeth asked directly, her steel-grey eyes so like her mother's, missing nothing. Catherine considered how to answer, aware that her daughter deserved honesty. The immediate danger is past. The Hollisters will face justice for their crimes, including what happened to your father. But others might come, Elizabeth concluded with unsettling perception, because they know who you are now. That's a possibility we need to consider, Catherine acknowledged, sitting beside her daughter, which means we have decisions to make. Before they could continue their conversation, a commotion outside drew their attention. 3 riders were approaching from the north, not outlaws, but official representatives of territorial law enforcement. Catherine recognized the lead rider immediately, Marshal Robert Grant, the senior federal lawman for the Arizona Territory. Looks like decisions might be made for us, she murmured, moving to the door. Sheriff Dawson met the marshal and his deputies at the edge of town, engaging in serious conversation before leading them toward the jailhouse. Catherine, watching from Abigail's porch, felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the instinct to run that had guided her for 3 years. But Elizabeth's small hand, slipping into hers, anchored her to the spot. "We're not running anymore," Elizabeth stated quietly, a declaration rather than a question. Catherine looked down at her daughter, seeing in those young eyes a wisdom and determination beyond her years. "No," she decided in that moment, "we're not running anymore." Marshal Grant found them there a few minutes later, his weathered face unreadable as he approached. Catherine straightened, prepared for whatever came next. Arrest, interrogation, perhaps even charges related to her vigilante pursuit of the Hollisters. "Mrs. Catherine Blackwood," Grant began formally, removing his hat. "Or should I say, Quicksilver Kate? Been looking for you for quite some time." "Marshal Grant," she acknowledged coolly. "I assume you're here about the Hollisters?" "Partially," he confirmed. "Word travels fast when someone manages what the entire Arizona Rangers couldn't accomplish in 2 years, capturing all 3 Hollister brothers in one afternoon." Catherine remained silent, waiting for the inevitable questions about her methods, her past, her identity. Instead, Grant surprised her completely. "I knew your husband, Mrs. Blackwood. Captain James Blackwood was a fine officer and a better man. What happened in St. Louis was a miscarriage of justice that many of us in law enforcement have not forgotten. The unexpected mention of James, spoken with genuine respect, momentarily cracked Catherine's carefully maintained composure. Elizabeth squeezed her hand in silent support. "I'm not here to cause you trouble," Grant continued, noting her reaction. "Quite the opposite. I have a proposition that might interest you." Over the next hour, in the privacy of Abigail's sitting room, Marshal Grant outlined a situation that presented Catherine with an unexpected path forward. The territorial governor, impressed by reports of the Whispering Creek incident, had authorized Grant to offer Catherine a special position, consultant to the Arizona Rangers, on matters related to outlaw gangs operating in the territory. "Your knowledge of these criminal operations is unparalleled," Grant explained. "The tracking methods you used to locate and identify the Hollisters, the defensive strategies you implemented in this town, these are exactly the skills our Rangers need." Catherine listened with skeptical attention. "And my past, the fact that I've operated outside the law in pursuing my husband's killers? Let's call it a pardon in exchange for service," Grant replied pragmatically. "The governor is more interested in results than technicalities. The Hollisters have cost Arizona thousands in lost commerce and dozens of lives. You brought them to justice when official channels failed. I'd need guarantees," Catherine said, her mind rapidly assessing this unexpected offer. "Safety for Elizabeth, permission to maintain our home here in Whispering Creek. All arrangeable," Grant assured her. "You wouldn't be a ranger yourself. That would be too politically complicated given your unique history. But as a civilian consultant, you'd have the protection of territorial law while helping us dismantle the remaining outlaw networks." Elizabeth, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke. "We could stay here. This would still be our home." The hopeful note in her daughter's voice settled something in Catherine's heart. Whispering Creek had become more than just another hiding place. It had become the home they both needed, a community that had embraced them despite their secrets. "I need time to consider this," Catherine told Grant, though her decision was already forming. "Take until tomorrow," he replied, rising to leave. "But know this, whether you accept or decline, your actions here have earned you the gratitude of the territorial government. The Hollisters will never threaten another settlement." After Grant departed, Catherine walked with Elizabeth to the ECU edge of town, finding a quiet spot overlooking the desert valley that had become their sanctuary. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, turning distant mesas to gold against the deepening blue sky. "What are you thinking, Mom?" Elizabeth asked, studying her mother's profile with that penetrating gaze that missed nothing. Catherine considered the question carefully. "I'm thinking about choices. For 3 years we've been running, making choices based on fear and necessity rather than what we actually wanted. And now we have the opportunity to choose differently," Catherine replied, putting her arm around her daughter's shoulders to build something rather than just survive. Elizabeth leaned against her mother, a rare moment of physical vulnerability from a child who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "I want to stay. I like it here. I have friends at school, and Miss Abigail says she can teach me to bake proper Boston cream pie." A smile touched Catherine's lips, the first genuine one in days. Boston cream pie is a compelling argument. They watched the sun sink lower, painting the desert in fiery hues of orange and red. The beauty of it struck Catherine anew, not just the landscape, but the simple peace of standing beside her daughter without constantly scanning for threats. "Your father would have loved this view," she said softly. "He always said the territories had a particular kind of beauty that changed a person forever once they'd seen it. Do you think he'd be proud of what we did yesterday?" Elizabeth's question carried the weight of a child trying to connect with a father known only through stories. Catherine considered this carefully. Your father believed in justice, but he believed in law too. He might have questioned my methods, but never my purpose, to protect you and to ensure that good people could live without fear. As twilight deepened around them, Catherine made her decision. The path forward wouldn't be simple. There would be challenges in transitioning from fugitive to law enforcement consultant, complications in reconciling Quicksilver Kate with Catherine Blackwood. But for the first time in years, she could envision a future not defined by running or revenge. The next morning, Catherine found Marshal Grant at the jailhouse, overseeing preparations to transport the Hollister brothers to Tucson for formal charging. "I'll accept your offer," she informed him without preamble, "with additional conditions we need to discuss." Grant nodded, unsurprised. "I expected nothing less." From his cell, Samuel Hollister watched this exchange with calculating eyes. "So the legendary Quicksilver Kate becomes a lapdog for the law," he commented acidly. "How disappointing." Catherine turned to face the outlaw leader who had haunted her existence for years. In the harsh morning light, he seemed smaller somehow, his scarred face no longer the embodiment of terror, but merely a man facing the consequences of his choices. "You never understood, Samuel," she replied evenly. "This was never about the thrill of the hunt or proving who was better. It was about creating a world where my daughter could live without looking over her shoulder. Today, I'm one step closer to that world." Something in her calm certainty seemed to disturb Hollister more than any display of hatred could have. He fell silent, turning away as deputies secured him for transport. Outside, Whispering Creek bustled with renewed activity. The telegraph operator posted news that the captured members of the Hollister gang had confessed to multiple crimes, including conspiracy in the murder of James Blackwood. Catherine's suspicions had been confirmed. Samuel had indeed ordered the St. Louis attack in retaliation for his public humiliation in Denver. Sheriff Dawson approached as she emerged from the jailhouse. "Town council met this morning," he informed her, "voted unanimously to appoint you as special advisor on security matters. Seems your little demonstration yesterday impressed everyone." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Special advisor? That's not necessary?" "Maybe not," Dawson acknowledged with a slight smile. "But it legitimizes what you've been doing anyway, and it comes with a small stipend. Enough to fix that roof on the Prescott place before winter." The simple, practical consideration, so typical of frontier thinking, brought unexpected emotion to Catherine's throat. This wasn't just acceptance, it was integration into the community's future. As Marshal Grant and his deputies departed, with their notorious prisoners, Catherine Blackwood stood on the jailhouse porch, watching them disappear into the distance. Elizabeth joined her, slipping her small hand into her mother's. "What happens now?" the girl asked. Catherine looked down at her daughter, then out at the town that had become their home, the place where Quicksilver Kate and Catherine Blackwood had finally become one person, with no need for disguise or deception. "Now," she answered with quiet certainty, "we begin again." 3 months after the Hollister incident, Whispering Creek had settled into a new normal. The town had gained a certain notoriety throughout the territory, the settlement that had captured the infamous Hollister brothers, bringing curious travelers and even a journalist from a San Francisco newspaper seeking interviews about the confrontation. Most citizens politely declined, protecting both their privacy and Catherine's. The Hollister trial in Tucson had concluded with swift justice. Samuel and William received death sentences for multiple murders across 3 territories, while Matthew, given his youth and lesser involvement, faced 20 years at Yuma Territorial Prison. Catherine had testified for 2 grueling days, recounting not only the events in Whispering Creek, but also the St. Louis murder that had set her on this path years earlier, standing on the porch of what everyone now openly called the Blackwood Ranch, rather than the old Prescott place. Catherine surveyed the improvements made possible by her official position as security consultant to the Arizona Rangers. The leaking roof had been replaced, a proper corral constructed for their newly acquired horses, and the cabin expanded with a second bedroom, giving Elizabeth her own space for the first time in years. "Rider coming," Elizabeth called from where. She practiced with her new Winchester, a smaller model, appropriate for her age, but perfectly functional. Catherine had finally relented to her daughter's request for proper shooting lessons, recognizing that the girl deserved the skills to protect herself in a still untamed land. Catherine shaded her eyes against the late afternoon sun, identifying Sheriff Dawson's distinctive silhouette long before his features became clear. Something in his posture, tense, urgent, triggered her instincts. Trouble was coming. "Elizabeth, continue your practice, but stay within calling distance," she instructed calmly, moving to meet the approaching lawman. Dawson dismounted at the gate, his expression confirming Catherine's suspicions. "Telegraph from Marshal Grant," he said without preamble, handing her a folded paper. "Thought you should see it immediately." The message was brief, but carried implications that sent a chill through Catherine's body. "Hollister transfer ambushed. Stop, 3 guards dead. Stop, William escaped. Stop, Samuel killed resisting. Stop, suspect inside. Help. Stop, advise. Extreme caution. Stop, Grant." "When?" Catherine asked, her mind already calculating possibilities. "Yesterday morning, near Gila Bend," Dawson replied grimly. "Grant says William disappeared into the desert with at least 2 accomplices. They had fresh horses waiting." Catherine folded the telegram, her expression betraying nothing of the cold fury building inside her. After everything, the trial, the testimonies, the supposed justice, a Hollister was free again, undoubtedly seeking revenge. "He'll come here," she stated with certainty. "Not immediately, but eventually. William was always the most reckless of the brothers, but not stupid enough to ride straight for us. He'll gather men, resources." Dawson nodded in agreement. "I've already sent word to neighboring settlements to watch for strangers asking questions about Whispering Creek or you specifically." They spoke for several minutes, revising defensive arrangements and establishing new protocols. As Dawson prepared to leave, Catherine made a decision. "I won't hide again," she told him firmly. "Elizabeth and I have made a home here. William, Hollister won't take that from us." "The entire town stands with you," Dawson assured her. "What happened with the brothers wasn't just your fight. It was Whispering Creek, protecting its own. That hasn't changed." After he departed, Catherine watched Elizabeth practicing her shooting stance, back straight, feet properly positioned, handling the rifle with the same natural affinity Catherine had shown at her age. Pride mingled with determination as she considered what lay ahead. That evening, she reopened the leather-bound book that had tracked the Hollisters for years, turning to a fresh page to begin documenting what was known about William's escape. Old habits reasserted themselves as she methodically analyzed possibilities, identifying likely hideouts and potential allies the escaped outlaw might seek. Elizabeth found her there, lamplight illuminating the scattered papers and maps across the table. "He's coming, isn't he?" the girl asked, her perception as sharp as ever. "William Hollister." Catherine neither sugar-coated nor dismissed the danger. "Eventually, yes, but we'll be ready when he does." Elizabeth nodded, accepting this reality with the same composure she had shown throughout their ordeal. "Should we practice night shooting? Tomorrow? You always said most real gunfights happen in poor light." A smile touched Catherine's lips despite the circumstances. "Yes, that would be prudent. And perhaps it's time I showed you how to recognize when you're being followed." Life continued in Whispering Creek, despite the shadow of William Hollister's escape. Catherine's official duties as security consultant took her on occasional journeys to neighboring settlements, helping local lawmen establish better defensive protocols. Her reputation now served as both shield and sword, Most smaller criminal elements avoided areas known to be under Quicksilver Kate's protection, while territorial authorities increasingly sought her expertise. 2 months passed with no sign of William Hollister. Catherine maintained vigilance while refusing to let fear dictate their lives. Elizabeth attended school regularly, made friends, and continued her shooting practice with remarkable dedication. The Blackwood Ranch thrived with the addition of cattle and expanded gardens. Then came the first whisper. A drifter passing through Bisbee mentioned a man asking detailed questions about Catherine Blackwood, describing a hard-faced individual with a distinctive scar along his jawline that matched William's appearance. The report reached Catherine through Marshall Grant's network 3 days later. "He's gathering information," she explained to Dawson and Cooper during an emergency meeting in the sheriff's office, "studying my movements, looking for patterns and vulnerabilities." "Just like you did with them," Cooper observed. "Exactly," Catherine confirmed. "William may lack Samuel's strategic mind, but he's patient when it comes to revenge. He won't risk a direct confrontation unless he believes the advantage is overwhelming." "What's your recommendation?" Dawson asked, deferring to her experience with the Hollisters. Catherine considered their options carefully. "We don't change our routines. That would alert him that we're aware of his surveillance. Instead, we prepare contingencies while appearing to maintain normal activities." Her plan was methodical and comprehensive. Reinforced defenses disguised as ordinary improvements, specialized signals established between key buildings in town, and carefully choreographed response patterns for various scenarios. Most importantly, Catherine insisted on distributing responsibilities widely. "William expects me to be the central defender," she explained. "He'll focus his planning around neutralizing me specifically. By spreading capabilities throughout the community, we create a defense that doesn't collapse if any individual is compromised." As winter settled over the territory, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain to the desert landscape, Catherine found herself more integrated into Whispering Creek's community than ever before. The shared threat had dissolved remaining barriers between her past and present identities. Children who once knew her only as the quiet widow now asked eagerly for shooting tips, while women who had kept a respectful distance sought her advice on home defense. What surprised her most was how naturally she adapted to this new role, part protector, part teacher, fully herself for the first time in years. The weight of secrecy had lifted, replaced by the different but somehow lighter burden of acknowledged responsibility. One evening, returning from a meeting with Dawson, Catherine found Elizabeth at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers covered in careful drawings, detailed sketches of various firing positions around their property. "What's this?" she asked, examining the surprisingly accurate renderings. "Defensive plans," Elizabeth replied matter-of-factly. "I've been thinking about sightlines from the house. The north corner has a blind spot we should address." Catherine studied her daughter with a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in her tactical thinking, sorrow that a child her age thought in such terms, and fierce love for the remarkable person Elizabeth was becoming. "You're right," she acknowledged, pointing to the drawing. "Perhaps a small platform in the oak tree would provide coverage without being obvious." They worked together into the evening, refining plans and discussing contingencies. When Elizabeth finally went to bed, Catherine remained at the table, contemplating how thoroughly their lives had transformed. The quiet widow and her daughter were gone, replaced by a formidable team preparing to face whatever came their way. 3 days later, a cowhand from the Peterson Ranch rode hard into Whispering Creek, with news that set the town on edge. 3 armed strangers had been spotted, watching the main road from a ridge overlooking the approach to town. "William's reconnaissance," Catherine confirmed when Dawson brought her the report. "He's mapped the terrain and is now studying our movements." "What's our play?" the sheriff asked. Catherine's steel-grey eyes hardened with resolve. "We spring. The trap before he can set it. It's time to turn the hunter back into the hunted." That night, as Whispering Creek prepared for what might come, Catherine Blackwood stood on her porch beneath a star-filled sky. Her custom Colt hung at her side, its familiar weight a reminder of both who she had been and who she had become. "We're ready, James," she whispered to the memory of her husband. "Whatever comes next, we face it standing our ground." The desert. Wind carried her words away into the darkness, where somewhere beyond the town's boundaries, William Hollister plotted his revenge, unaware that Quicksilver Kate had already begun counter-moves in a deadly game of strategy neither could afford to lose. Dawn painted the eastern sky with streaks of crimson as Catherine Blackwood mounted her dun gelding, the Winchester secured, in its saddle scabbard and her custom Colt at her hip. Rather than waiting for William Hollister to strike, she had devised a bold counter-strategy, one that defied conventional wisdom but played to her unique strengths. "Remember," she instructed Deputy Collins, who would accompany her for the first leg of the journey, "maintain absolute silence about my actual destination. The official story is that I've been summoned to Tucson by Marshal Grant." The young lawman nodded seriously. "Yes, ma'am. Sheriff Dawson briefed me thoroughly. Far as anyone knows, you're headed southeast, not northwest toward the ridge." Satisfied with his understanding, Catherine turned to Elizabeth, who stood on the porch with Miss Abigail. Unlike previous partings where Catherine disguised the potential danger of her missions, this time she'd been completely honest with her daughter about the risks. "I'll return within 5 days," she promised, her steel-grey eyes meeting Elizabeth's identical ones. "If not, special place number 3, the letter in the silver box, and trust only those who know the password." Elizabeth finished calmly. "But you'll be back." It wasn't a question but a statement of faith that momentarily tightened Catherine's throat with emotion. She nodded once, unwilling to make promises she couldn't guarantee, then turned her horse toward the trail leading out of town. The official story, that Catherine had been called away on territorial business, would spread quickly through Whispering Creek and beyond. With luck, it would reach William Hollister's informants, drawing his attention southeast, while Catherine circled behind to locate his camp in the rugged hills northwest of town. "The best defense is to become the hunter rather than the hunted," she'd explained to Sheriff Dawson during their planning session. "William expects me to fortify and wait. Instead, I'll track him to his hiding place while he's focused on monitoring the town." By mid-morning, Catherine had parted ways with Deputy Collins, who would continue along the main trail, leaving clear tracks for any watching eyes, while she cut north through a dry creek bed that left minimal sign of her passing. Years of exhibition shooting had brought her fame, but it was her less publicized skills as a tracker that served her now, reading the subtle signs of the landscape with the same precision she applied to marksmanship. The Arizona winter had brought occasional rain to the desert, making tracking conditions ideal. By late afternoon, Catherine had found what she sought: the distinctive hoofprints of 3 horses crossing the Peterson Ranch's northern boundary, heading toward the rugged islands locals called the Diablo Ridges. "Smart," she murmured to herself, studying the terrain ahead. The ridges offered numerous natural caves, reliable water from hidden springs, and commanding views of all approaches to Whispering Creek. William had chosen his vantage point well. Catherine made camp in a sheltered draw as darkness fell, building no fire that might betray her position. As she chewed on dried beef and hardtack, she contemplated the man she pursued. William Hollister had always stood in his brother's shadow. Samuel the strategist, William the enforcer. Now, without Samuel's restraining influence, William would be more unpredictable, potentially more dangerous. The moon rose full and bright, illuminating the desert landscape in ethereal silver. Catherine packed her simple camp and continued upward into the ridges, taking advantage of the natural light for a night approach. Moving with the silent efficiency that had once impressed military scouts, she navigated the increasingly treacherous terrain, alert for any sign of sentries or alarm systems. Near midnight, she caught the faint scent of wood smoke, almost imperceptible, but enough to confirm human presence in these otherwise empty highlands. Catherine secured her horse in a protected hollow, checked her weapons, and continued on foot, every sense heightened as she entered the zone of maximum danger. The camp revealed itself gradually through careful reconnaissance, a natural amphitheater, sheltered on three sides by sheer rock faces, with a small spring bubbling from the cliff wall. A crude cabin, likely built by long-departed prospectors, had been reinforced and improved. 3 horses were picketed in a natural enclosure, and a single figure maintained watch from a boulder overlooking the camp. Catherine counted 4 men. In total, as she circled the perimeter, William Hollister, recognizable even at distance by his distinctive profile, and 3 companions she didn't recognize. Professional gunmen, judging by their weapons and alertness, even while at relative ease around their small fire. From her concealed position among the rocks above the camp, she could hear fragments of their conversation carried on the night breeze. Reliable. Information she's headed to Tucson, a bearded man was saying. Left this morning with that young deputy. William's harsh laugh cut through the night. Perfect timing. 2 more days to finish preparations, then we hit Whispering Creek, while Quicksilver Kate is chasing shadows in Tucson. The confirmation of her suspicions sent a chill through Catherine that had nothing to do with the desert night. William wasn't planning a direct confrontation with her at all. He intended to strike at the town, at Elizabeth, while believing Catherine was elsewhere. Town won't know what hit them, another man commented, feeding sticks into the small fire. That sheriff's got what, 2 deputies? Against the 4 of us? 5, William corrected. Jenkins joins us tomorrow from Bisbee. He's bringing the dynamite. Dynamite. The word hung in the night air like a death sentence. William wasn't planning a simple raid or even targeted revenge. He was preparing to destroy Whispering Creek entirely. Catherine's mind raced through options, calculating odds with cold precision. She could attempt to take out the 4 men. Now but a firefight in the dark against unknown gunmen carried significant risks. If she failed, there would be no warning for the town. Alternatively, she could retreat immediately, race back to Whispering Creek, and prepare a defensive reception. Before she could decide, fate intervened. A small rock dislodged beneath her boot, clattering down the cliff face with unnatural loudness in the quiet night. Instantly, all conversation below ceased. "Check that," William ordered sharply, his hand moving to his gun. "Could be a mountain lion." The sentry moved toward the source of the sound, rifle ready. Catherine remained perfectly still, controlling her breathing as she weighed her rapidly diminishing options. The moment of ambush had passed. Now she needed to escape undetected to warn Whispering Creek. As the sentry approached her position, Catherine made her decision. Extracting a small mirror from her pocket, she positioned it to catch moonlight, then flashed a brief reflection toward the opposite cliff face. The momentary gleam of light drew the sentry's attention away from her hiding place. Something over. "There," he called, changing direction. Catherine seized the opportunity, slipping from shadow to shadow with practiced silence, making her way back toward her horse. She had almost reached relative safety when a voice from behind froze her in place. "That's far enough, Kate." William Hollister stood 20 paces away, his revolver aimed steadily at her back. His face, illuminated by moonlight, showed equal measures of triumph and hatred. "Should have known Samuel's intel was wrong," he said conversationally. "You're not the type to run to Tucson when there's danger. You're the type to hunt it down." Catherine turned slowly, her hands carefully visible, mind calculating angles and possibilities. "William, Prison didn't improve your disposition, I see. Cold smile touched his lips. Didn't stay long enough for it to take. Unlike Samuel, I don't underestimate you. Yet here we are, Catherine observed calmly. You, making the same mistake he did, thinking you have the upper hand when you've actually walked into a trap. Uncertainty flickered briefly across William's face, exactly the reaction she'd hoped for. In that moment of hesitation, Catherine's hand moved with the legendary speed that had earned her the name Quicksilver, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. Her bullet struck William's shoulder rather than center mass, a deliberate choice. As he staggered backward, she dove for cover behind a boulder, a second shot kicking up dust where she had stood moments before. "Kill her!" William bellowed, his voice echoing across the rocky terrain as his companions raced toward the sound of gunfire. Catherine's position was precarious at best, 1 against 4, with limited cover in unfamiliar territory. But unlike the Hollister gang, she had spent the past several hours memorizing every feature of the landscape around her. Instead of retreating downhill toward her horse, she moved laterally along the ridge, using the moonlit shadows to mask her movement while presenting the illusion of descending. 2 of William's men took the bait, charging down the path she had appeared to take, while William himself, clutching his bleeding shoulder, directed the third man to circle around to cut off her escape. Catherine reached a narrow fissure in the cliff face, barely visible unless one knew exactly where to look, and slipped inside. The natural chimney in the rock led upward to a position directly above the Hollister camp, a route she had identified during her earlier reconnaissance. From this vantage point, she watched as confusion spread among her pursuers. The 2 who had charged downhill found no trace of her trail in the rocky terrain. The third man circled uselessly, checking obvious hiding places. William, increasingly frantic as blood soaked his shirt, alternated between cursing his men's incompetence and firing wildly into shadows. Catherine weighed her options carefully. She could attempt to reach her horse and ride for Whispering Creek, but the sound of hoofbeats would betray her instantly. She could remain hidden until daylight forced the search to widen, but that would give William time to implement whatever plan involved the dynamite arriving tomorrow. A third option crystallized in her mind, bold, dangerous, but potentially decisive. Maneuvering through the fissure, Catherine emerged on a ledge overlooking the Hollister camp. The horses remained picketed below, including William's distinctive black stallion. The cabin contained their supplies, weapons, and, most critically, whatever plans and maps William had prepared for his attack on Whispering Creek. While William and his men searched the ridges above, Catherine descended silently into their empty camp. Within minutes, she had located what she sought, detailed drawings of Whispering Creek showing planned approaches, defensive positions, and most alarmingly, red X marks indicating targets for dynamite. The sheriff's office, the mercantile, and the schoolhouse. Catherine's blood ran cold at the methodical ruthlessness of the plan. This wasn't mere revenge, it was annihilation. Working rapidly, she gathered the maps and the gang's spare ammunition, then turned her attention to their horses. With quick efficiency, she cut through the picketing ropes, then fired a single shot into the air. The startled animals bolted instantly, scattering in all directions into the night. Simultaneously, William's distant voice rose in a furious shout. As he realized what was happening below, "The camp! Get back to the camp!" Catherine crouched in the doorway of the cabin, Winchester ready as the first of William's men came charging back into the clearing. Her shot caught him squarely in the chest, dropping him before he could raise his own weapon. The second man, showing more caution, dove for cover behind a boulder, but found himself exposed to Catherine's angle of fire. Her next bullet found his leg, removing him from the fight with a howl of pain. William and his remaining gunmen approached more carefully, using the terrain for cover as they worked their way toward the cabin. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, bullets splintering the wooden doorframe inches from Catherine's position. "You're outnumbered and surrounded, Kate," William called through the darkness. "Drop your weapons, and maybe I'll make it quick for you." Catherine remained silent, conserving ammunition and listening intently to the subtle sounds of movement outside. Years of exhibition shooting had honed her ability to determine position from the slightest of cues: a displaced pebble, a whisper of fabric against stone, the particular cadence of breathing under stress. When she finally responded, her voice carried calm certainty. "I have your plans, William. Whispering Creek will be ready long before your friend arrives with the dynamite." "It's over. Nothing's over until you're dead," he snarled, his control fracturing under the pressure of pain and frustrated rage. "You've taken everything from me, Samuel, my freedom, my reputation." "You took those yourself," Catherine countered. "The moment you ordered James killed in St. Louis, everything since has been the natural consequence of that choice." With a roar of incoherent fury, William broke cover, charging toward the cabin with gun blazing. It was the desperate move of a man consumed by hatred rather than tactical thinking, exactly what Catherine had calculated he would eventually do. Her Winchester spoke once, the report echoing across the rocky amphitheater as William Hollister crumpled mid-stride, his final expression one of disbelief rather than pain. The remaining gunman, witnessing his employer's fall, immediately threw down his weapon. "Don't shoot! I surrender." Dawn found Catherine Blackwood riding toward Whispering Creek, William Hollister's body secured across his own recovered stallion, the surviving gang member bound and following on a lead rope. The plans for the attack were safely tucked in her saddlebags, along with proof of William's wider network of criminal associates, information that would prove invaluable to Marshal Grant's ongoing efforts to pacify the territory. As the familiar silhouette of the town appeared on the horizon, Catherine allowed herself to acknowledge what had truly ended during the night. Not just William Hollister's threat, but the long shadow that had stretched across her life since James's murder. For the first time in years, she rode without looking over her shoulder, without calculating escape routes or defensive positions. Sheriff Dawson and a group of townspeople met her at the edge of Whispering Creek, their expressions transforming, from concern to amazement as they recognized her grim cargo. "It's done," she stated simply as she dismounted, fatigue finally seeping into her voice. "William Hollister won't threaten anyone again." Elizabeth pushed through the gathering crowd, her face showing neither surprise nor fear, only absolute confidence that her mother would return victorious. Without words, Catherine opened her arms, and her daughter stepped into them. That evening, as Whispering Creek celebrated not just their deliverance from threat, but the final closing of a dark chapter in their history, Catherine Blackwood sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. The custom colt that had defined her life for so many years rested in her lap, its weight suddenly feeling like an artifact of a different time. Elizabeth joined her, carrying 2 cups of steaming coffee. "What happens now?" she asked, settling beside her mother. "Now that it's truly over?" Catherine considered the question carefully, looking out over the land that had become their home, not through necessity or strategy, but through choice and connection. "Now," she answered, a genuine smile softening her features. "We live, Elizabeth, not just survive. Live." As darkness settled over the desert, Catherine Quicksilver Blackwood, legendary sharpshooter and protector of Whispering Creek, finally allowed herself to become simply Catherine, widow, mother and woman, with a future no longer defined by her past. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.